please. First.
Okay, we are live.
Okay. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. صباح الخير للغرب الأمريكي، مساء الخير للشرق الأمريكي، مساء الخير يمكن حتى تصبحوا على خير بفلسطين وبالعالم العربي. أهلا وسهلا فيكم. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. Welcome everybody to our open classroom, our fourth open classroom, revisiting the colonial harem, gender justice and resistance in the age of genocide. Before I go into any further, I would like to make an acknowledgement that my own university, San Francisco State, sits on the unceded colonial land of the Ohlone Nation that continues to be indigenous, and we continue to reaffirm our commitment to defeat the settler colonial project in the US, in Palestine, and elsewhere. I make this acknowledgement as an indigenous Palestinian whose land is colonized by Israeli settler colonialism, and where it is essential for anyone who comes or lives or visits Palestine to not only acknowledge whose land it is, but to also, no matter how long they or how short they stay, that they acknowledge and they state that their presence is validated by the indigenous Palestinian people in order not to be considered as part of the settler movement. I want to also take this opportunity to honor and acknowledge the martyrs, the fallen everywhere for all our communities and the struggle for freedom, justice, and peace, starting with the people in Gaza, the fallen thousands of people in Gaza, the people in Congo, in Sudan, in the streets of the United States, Turtle Island, and in the Western Hemisphere, in Kashmir, and throughout the world. And we think about everybody. We will like to take a moment of silence to honor them and to renew our determination to fight white supremacy, imperialism, Western empire, and all the forces that suppress us. Thank you. I would like to appreciate and express our gratitude for many people who made this open classroom possible. First, I want to start with our team of interns and graduate students, specifically Lin Asiri. And if are you behind the scene, Lin? Can you or you can't? Lin actually has been a bit under the weather. And Laith Ghulum. Laith, can you just identify yourself? Mention who you are and where you're joining from.
Hi, everyone. My name is Laith. I'm joining from Minneapolis, Minnesota, where I'm a doctoral student in gender, women, and sexuality studies.
I also want to thank the list of the co-sponsors for this particular open classroom and many others. I start with the Institute for the Critical Study of Zionism, Ilan Bebrath Foundation, the International Commission to Support Palestinian People's Rights, for joining us from Gaza, Frente Independentista Boricua from Puerto Rico, Westchester for Palestine, National Women's Studies Association, National Students for Justice in Palestine, Queers Undermining Israeli Terrorism, QUIT, Columbia University Apartheid Divest Coalition, Feminists for Justice in and for Palestine, CUNY for Palestine, Black Alliance for Peace, New York and New Jersey, Westchester for Palestine, Harlem for Palestine, Art Forces, which is the art project that we hosted in our last class about Eyewitness Silwan, the Center for Place, Culture, and Politics at the CUNY Graduate Center, Right to Education campaign at Birzeit University, and many others that if we miss, please, we will excuse us, and we will make sure that we alert again. We want to also thank our esteemed panelists who have joined us and who are always taking the time to come to with us. We also want to thank people who made this particular class. This particular class, Palestine Ethnic Studies Perspective, is a class offered at San Francisco State University. After the university has made scheduled the class to be taught in the summer, they canceled it and they refused to reinstate it. We tried until the last minute to convince them, students, faculty, community, members of the community, scholars from all over the world, including from our own university. The campaign was spearheaded by Professor Tomomi Kanakawa and many other organizations that participated in it, including California Scholars for Academic Freedom, Palestine Arab Muslim Caucus of the California Faculty Association, National Women's Studies Association, and many others, including some of our co-sponsors. The university refused. So at the last minute, we decided that we are going to launch the class as part of the Popular University for Gaza. And the Popular University for Gaza was launched, actually spearheaded by the National Student for Justice in Palestine, as a popular university that refuses to accept the status quo as a given, refuses to accept business as usual while genocide is going on, and insists to hold institutions accountable, and insist on transparency, on exposure of any connections with companies, with any interests that produce weapons, that enable the genocide to continue. And we also were very much assisted by many partners who were endorsed and co-sponsored earlier classes, and including Mundo Wise, which published an announcement of our first classroom, which was attended by 4,000 people. And we have within a week until now, we have already now reached 534 registered students in the class. That's actually quite impressive. We hold these open classrooms, and 5 of them this summer school, and the last one was going to be on July 5th on the Richard of the Earth Talk Back, but we are going to hold one more on July 8th, entitled Ghassan Kanafani and the Cultures of Resistance, talking about different forms of culture of resistance in Palestine, because we had a class on the prisoners last week, and one of our main participants was ill, was unable to participate, so we had to reschedule it. And so we will have 5 open classrooms, and also we have another closed class for the students in the class to have discussions. And so we are really thrilled by the number of the students who are participating and by coming together. And I wanted, so this is why we're holding this class, why we open the classrooms, because we believe that knowledge should not be produced only in the ivory tower, in the academy. And the knowledge that's produced in the academy is not superior to the knowledge that's produced in indigenous communities. We hold open classroom because we believe it's our responsibility, our organic intellectuals, to produce where we are from our own positions, knowledge that enable social movements that are fighting and struggling for justice. And we'd like to always bring activists, community organizers, and activists along with the students, so the students also understand and learn about the world outside of the classroom, about the histories of the struggles, bring intergenerational conversation with each other, learn how it is. And we do it in the spirit of 68, which for us at San Francisco State University marks the longest strike in the history of the student movement in the United States, led by the Black Student Union and the Third World Liberation Front, that demanded decolonizing the curriculum, dissolving the boundaries between university and community, and holding university accountable to the community, and which seems to be very similar to what the Popular University for Palestine is doing now, which has already reached hundreds of campuses around the US and around the world. Actually, Birzeit University is also participating. It has its own encampment, in addition to being surrounded and raided by the Israeli university. Encampments have sprung up all over the world, and students have been strongly suppressed. But then nonetheless, they have come again and again and again and challenged their institutions and have galvanized, contributed to the movement against genocide, and the movement against genocide had the back of the students. So this was not only a struggle, this was a struggle that was connected with everybody, much of the spirit of the movement against the war in Vietnam, the Black Power movement, the movement for the Black Intifada after the murder of George Floyd, and many, many other movements around the world. So this is why we do this. We do this to remember the history, to center on the voices of the marginalized, to remember what's going on, and we analyze them from the eyes of the voices of the marginalized. We would like to start by actually having maybe just 1 minute for our participants, esteemed scholars, to just introduce yourself, one thing about you, because we are going to post your bios in the chat as we do always, and they remain in the bios. So who would like to start? I will call on Professor Dar.
Assalamu alaikum, everyone, and thank you, Professor Abdul Hadi, for this privilege and honor of standing with you. I am a Kashmiri freedom fighter, and I'm citing a book that my uncle wrote, and he dedicated to the Kashmiri freedom fighter. And I stand with Palestinians, and I stand with Okinawans, and I stand with our indigenous communities here, and where I am standing right now, which is the Oloni village of Hujian, unceded land, which has nurtured and raised my children and my body and my soul. And I am just deeply honored to be here to do whatever is needed. That's all for me. Thank you. You're muted, Dr. Abdul Hadi.
Sorry, Professor Kinakawa.
Hi, I'm Tomomi Kinukawa. I'm a lecturer at San Francisco State University, and I'm sorry, my the screen is like blocked. My camera is broken for some reason. But I call myself a queer scholar activist with Chinese, Korean, and Japanese ancestries, and that's from where I speak. And should I talk about the
No, we'll come back. We'll come back to this.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I'm really honored to be here sharing this space with esteemed scholars today.
Dr. Seema Shakhsari.
Hi, everyone. My name is Seema Shakhsari, and I'm an associate professor at the University of Minnesota. I want to acknowledge that I teach and learn and do activism on Dakota land, stolen Dakota land, and I work at a university that profits from settler colonial violence against the Dakota people, and invests in companies that support the genocide in Gaza and support the Israeli state. So like many of you, we are hoping for divestment and fighting for divestment. I want to thank Professor Abdul Hadi and also Lace Ulum, who is behind the scenes, who have been working hard to make these classes happen. I'll stop there, and then when it's time for updates, I'll give updates.
Okay. Professor Nasruddin.
Assalamu alaikum, everyone. I'm very honored to be here with you today. And thank you, Professor Abdul Hadi, for organizing this. I should say that I speak to you today from the unceded land of the Nakutch Tunk people. And I am a filmmaker, and I work on Palestinian women, the Palestinian women's movement pre-1948 Nakba. So I'm very much interested in the history of women before the Nakba, with looking at the intergenerational work that women have been doing throughout, and looking at questions of the present time and how we can make history relevant today. And I will stop here, and yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much. And I was wondering if there are some updates. I know that Professor Seema would like to share with us some developments, what happened at the Senate in Minnesota yesterday, and Professor Kinakawa will share with us also brief updates about the Pride in Castro in San Francisco over the weekend on Sunday. So go ahead, please, Professor.
Thank you. Yes, yesterday, Minnesota Senate had a hearing by Senator Letts, who is a Zionist and who worked with JCRC and Zionist faculty at the University of Minnesota to organize this hearing, a 4-hour hearing, to prove that there is anti-Semitism at the University of Minnesota. And of course, there was a discrepancy in the time that was given to the Zionist faculty who spoke, and to those of us who, two faculty who spoke against the genocide, and also members of the Jewish community who are anti-occupation and anti-Zionist. It was very, I would say, very violent, the way that we were grilled and attacked, basically, by Senator Letts for our support of Palestinian liberation and for calling for an end to genocide. We were accused explicitly and implicitly of anti-Semitism and the extinction of all Jewish people and so on and so forth. And, a lot of the questions that were posed also to our students who are anti-occupation Jewish students, they were basically denied the status of being Jewish. They were said that, you don't represent the Jewish community at all. But a lot of these questions, which is interesting and I'm hoping we'll talk about, were revolved around the allegations of rape against Israeli women on October 7th, and a total denial of the genocide against Palestinians that has happened for the past 9 months. Of course, it goes beyond that, but particularly the post-October 7th genocide. And then just a quick update about what's happening in Minnesota. The Pride Parade here, the mainstream Pride Parade, is sponsored by companies that weapon manufacturing companies, a few of which, like Lockheed Martin and Bay Systems and Elbit Systems, operate here in the Twin Cities or in the suburbs. And, they get huge tax increments, funding from the cities for building their plants here. These are the companies that produce parts for F-14s that are dropping bombs on the people of Gaza. And the Pride, unfortunately and shamefully, has of course, the co-sponsors of Pride include some of these companies. And so there are a couple of events that are happening in response to this. One is Take Back the Pride. That will happen on the Pride Day, Saturday and Sunday. There are basically different marches. And then there's also People's Pride. And both of these will both address the Cop City and the police brutality in the Twin Cities, as well as the genocide and its connections to the pinkwashing that happens in the U.S. So those are the updates that I had.
Thank you, Dr. Shakhsari. Dr. Kinakawa, can you give us a little bit update about the Pride in San Francisco on Sunday?
Yes, so so in San Francisco, it's a very similar situation, and so the Grand Marshal Bill Porter, who is has been made accountable for their Zionism, and also sponsors such as Amazon, U.S. Bank, they have been supporting Israeli extremist government. And then SFPD, they are supposed to double presence, and also Zionists like JCRC and AJC, who have been sponsoring who are like diehard Zionist organizations who have a pro-Israeli float are going to have Israeli floats. And so there have been a lot of course, a critique, and especially Palestinian queer leaders and activists, artists have been calling for boycotts and also requesting us to centralize Palestinian queers and trans the people. And so in response, like there was a march last on Sunday, and that was titled "The Queer as in Intifada: SF Pride Rise with Genocide," and it was organized by pretty much autonomous groups of organizations and people, including Queers and I think Jewish Voice for Peace and so forth. And so that we did gathered in Castro and like walked through the Castro streets, and also on Sunday, when actually the prides will take place, we will have different. I mean, like the march, against protesting against the San Francisco Pride, which is titled "Queer and Trans March for Palestinian Liberation," and so there has. I just want to mention that there are a lot of queer leaders in San Francisco, in our communities, and also queer leaders at SFSU who have been very much silent and colluding with Zionists, and who haven't made any assertion about or haven't made any critique of this as a San Francisco Pride. And also San Francisco Pride has failed to even mention genocide. And so I just want to say that there is a connection between the ways in which the AMED, Dr. Abdul Hadi, has been attacked at SFSU, and Palestinian course has been cancelled, and also the ways in which this Zionist Pride March is still on this coming Sunday, and that there is much need for more solidarity building, the coalition building, to fight against all these issues. So,
thank you, everybody. This is the way I want to lay out how are we going to. Yeah, sure. But do you want to do it later at the end of when we? Okay. Yeah, if there is any events that we want to announce and so on. So we would like to let you know how the event's going to go. So now we're going to go into the discussion, going over the title, going over the content of it, what it is, what are the three questions, how are we laying down the discussion, and how we're going to go with it. Of course, we're all colleagues. We work with each other in different capacities. So sometimes we finish each other's sentences. Sometimes we ask each other's questions. So we like it to be as dynamic as possible and raise it. Also make it as enjoyable, especially for everybody, but especially for the 534 students in the class who we had very lively discussion on Monday, actually, something about this open classroom. So, but for example, I wanted to first start by framing a bit why the title, Revisiting the Colonial Harem and Gender Justice and Resistance in the Age of Genocide. One is that I think it's to start from actually the broader, the age of genocide. We did not say only the age of Gaza genocide, because we wanted to actually link the question of the genocide, the Israeli genocide in Gaza that is ongoing now, that must be stopped yesterday, not today, with genocide against other communities around the world, historically and contemporarily. We can't talk about every single history and so on, but it's important to kind of make the connections and talk about what happens when there are systems of repression that are colluding to do that. And we wanted to also make sure that we are thinking about both the repression as well as the resistance. So we're not talking about only one side, but talking about the other part of it. Third is that it's really important in any course we teach, especially a course on Palestine, that we always connect the justice in and for Palestine with the indivisibility for justice, which includes gender and sexual justice. So this is always part and parcel of it. In this particular case, the graphic in particular on the flyer, as you can see it, we chose this image that was circulated of Gaza, that was circulated in 2014 in Israeli WhatsApp chats and different social media, presenting Gaza in a particular way. I've analyzed it in an article I wrote about that, but I would like maybe some of my colleagues would like to jump on it and speak about that, the various imagery that is constructed and how does it work in the imaginary, and especially in the Western imaginary and in the places and the countries that are funding and enabling and making it possible to follow up, carry out this genocide. The other part is because we talked about repression and resistance, there is also an image of a woman with a slingshot, but also the face is covered. This is also in symbolizing the image of the many organizers at the student intifadas, at the protests and so on, that are covering their faces because of the whole facial recognition data. That's and also actually the call by the state of New York governor, who said that she wants to take the masks off people's faces, prevent masks. And this is specifically in order to target people and penalize people for expressing their views and their dissent and their opposition to these repressive fascistic policies. And we also included the pink triangle, which has been a symbol of repression of queer people, but has been adopted by ACTUB, one of the most active groups in the 80s against AIDS, HIV syndrome, but also for liberation, and connected queer liberation with Palestinian liberation, and has been really active and has also been on all Pride marches, has been extremely active, and was actually written up on, I think, Saturday or Sunday in the New York Times about that. So we thought this way we'll actually signal to people what the content of the class is. And revisiting the Colonial Harem, we take it from the title of the Malik Alula, the Algerian scholar who wrote The Colonial Harem. And it's basically a collection, a book that he collected multiple cards from postcards taken of pictures that French tourists bought and sent back to their families in France while they were on tourism in Algeria, that are constructed by a particular way. And I see, like maybe one of my colleagues can actually elaborate on that, so we can all share the space. And Dr. Barbara Harlow, the late Barbara Harlow at University of Texas at Austin, who has actually done a lot of translation, including Palestinian writers, Ghassan Kanafani and many others, and has been very active in support for prisoners in Ireland and in South Africa as well, has written the introduction and explains several things, but I'm going to probably call maybe on Dr. Hadar to kind of like go into this discussion. And so we take that into our kind of like the whole colonial. Is it still colonial? Is it relevant? Are we still talking about something that is relevant? Are we still facing the colonial harem? Or if we are not facing something similar to it, how do we understand it? So we're by employing Malik Alur, and I'll say more, but I would really like to hear from my fellow colleagues and participants in this roundtable discussion. So we'll have employing Malik Alur as the Colonial Harem as a point of departure. This open classroom, the fourth, which we said, is going to discuss the following questions. In what ways do Islamophobia, Orientalism, and Zionism enable the censorship and silencing of critical thinking, debate, and teaching on gender and sexual justice in Arab, Muslim, and Palestinian communities in particular, and gender and sexual justice in general? Secondly, how significant is pinkwashing and colonial feminism in enabling and justifying the ongoing Israeli genocide in Gaza? And what are some of the strategies to defeat them, pinkwashing and colonial feminism? So we'll do three rounds. First round, we will just talk about the concepts in general. Each participant will get 5 minutes for each round, 30 minutes in total. So if one person takes 3 minutes, you will have 10 minutes left in order for us to be able to also have conversation among us. And we could also first discuss the concepts, the colonial harem, and then we can talk about how significant pinkwashing and colonial feminism, and then maybe we can talk about the strategy, and that we can talk about the silencing, if that makes sense. Is that okay with everybody? Are we good to go with that? All right. So how about we start with the first question, maybe with Dr. Dar?
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Abdul Hadi. I think I love Malika Lula's The Colonial Harem, and I use it not just to show how colonialism created the fetishized, hypersexualized image of the colonial harem, and how they created desire for coloniality, the desire for the colonized in a very perverted, fetishized, genocidal way, but also to use it as a starting point for who is not in the book. Because I think the guys, the men, the colonized men, who are also simultaneously created as rapacious, as wild, as hypersexual, and hypervirile, is they're not included in the postcards, but they're ever present in the psyche, and they're present through the books, through the travelogues, later through Hollywood, and in the context of my study in Kashmir, in Indian films. The construct of the rapacious colonized man and these gendered, fetishized, sexualized stereotypes are critical for the colonizers to enable them to kill us, to enable us to sexually harass us, rape us, and to have us dehumanized to the level that we are mere objects, to use our photographs as colonial trophies, and to weave these narratives, these colonial narratives of replete with the deepest, sexual fantasies of the colonial mind that enable the ongoing colonialisms all over the world today, including that on the Turtle Island and of Palestine and of Kashmir. And this has been a trademark. So, and it's mind-blowing for the students. It's mind-blowing for me whenever I revisit it. And it's a colonial harem that is ongoing, and we really need to dismantle it altogether for all of our freedom. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Dar. And actually, you messed up my time calculation, but that's okay because we can talk some more about it. And I was so happy that you mentioned the whole question of hyper sexuality, but also there is the whole question of the ways the photographs were taken, the way they were posed. And I see Dr. Shahsari, nodding. So why don't you please go next and talk, and and then let us know. Dr. Nasruddin and Kinakawa, who would like to go next? Yeah, go ahead, please.
Thank you so much. I want to take off from where Homa left us in talking about can you guys hear me or see me?
We can hear you.
Both hear you and see you.
Okay, sorry. So I just wanted to give a little bit of background for those who are not familiar with Colonial Harem, which, as Dr. Abdul Hadi said, is a book that was published by Malik Alula, who was an Algerian poet and author, who basically gathered these postcards, as Rabab mentioned, that were sent by French colonizers, not just tourists, but also soldiers to France in early 20th century. Of course, the French colonial army arrived in Algeria in 1830, and the colonization of Algeria continued until independence in 1962. But in early 20th century, there was this obsession with taking pictures of Algerian women in the way that, as Homa mentioned, was really very much fetishized. It was how the colonizers fantasized about Muslim women and Algerian women as half naked with see-through veils, with exposed breasts, in what they assume to be what the harems look like: people smoking hookahs, women smoking hookahs behind bars. I think one of the images is called Cloister Girls. So there are two, again, half-naked girls behind bars, as if they're imprisoned in their home. And of course, the photos also meant to portray Algerian women as sexually available to the gaze of French men. And the reality was that they were the Frenchmen who, the colonizers, when they arrived in Algeria, they were very much unsettled with the fact that they could not see behind the veil. So there was this kind of curiosity, and also, as I said, anxiety of, the land should be available to us, and the women of the land should be available to us. But the veil kind of created that barrier. And so hence this kind of desire, as as I mentioned, to kind of take the veil off. And the anxiety was also because Algerian women's eyes were the only thing that they could see, the anxiety of, as Alula says, to be seen and not to see. So the anxiety that the veil created for the colonizers is, I think, important to think about. So these fantasies became the dominant way that veil and harem have been represented in colonial imagery, of course, to this day. Rabab mentioned how these photographs were taken. They actually hired models, because this wasn't the way that actually Algerian women lived. And in particular, models or people, not models really, they modeled women, in particular for poor segments of the society, and paid them to pose in studios, created this kind of fantasies of what the interior of homes and harems look like, and and reproduce those fantasies through this imagery. And we see, as Homa mentioned, this kind of orientalist representations of Southwest Asian, North African women over and over again. We have seen this in the case of Afghanistan, and the claims of rescuing and the desire to unveil Afghan women, the enthusiastic appropriations of the Iranian women's woman life freedom movement in Iran by US politicians, and of course in Palestine, in images where we see Israeli soldiers take photos with Palestinian women's undergarments in postcard-like images that now they post on social media, no longer on postcards. And the idea is that we have penetrated the interior space of Palestinian homes, and the symbolic penetration of Palestinian women through access to their most intimate belongings is a gesture of domination. It is, of course, a way that Zionism, as a heteronormative and racial project, reproduces supremacy of, in particular, Ashkenazi Jews over Palestinian people. And of course, this this has a history since the inception of Zionism, but in particular after after colonizing Palestinian land. Elosh Shohat, many of you who have read Taboo Memories remember that she argues that the Israeli state's Zionism, which is a modern nationalist project, has discursively manufactured a unified Jewish identity that is crystallized in the figure of Sabra, which is a hyper-masculine, able-bodied, cis-white European Jewish man and Ashkenazi man who explored the flora and fauna of Palestine as an empty land to be conquered and penetrated. And this assumed unified Jewish identity, of course, is used to project anti-Semitism, which is really a racist European response against Jews in Europe, on Arabs and Palestinians. So the Israeli soldiers today are really are celebrated like heroes, emulating that image of Sabra in the Israeli nationalist discourse. And they're really, the logic of war is always about conquering the land being conflated with conquering the women of the land and demasculinizing the man in the colonized man. And this is, of course, we see that in the rape and sexual assault of Palestinian women and men in Israeli prisons, which is a common occurrence. And of course, UN has even produced a report about it. But allegations of rape of Israeli women by Hamas is the only thing that we hear about, as I said, in the case of, for example, the Senate hearing, the obsession with what happened on October 7, in particular, the allegations of sexual assault against Israeli women, which, to this day, even after UN investigation, because the Israeli state was not even allowing the UN to go investigate, but after they did, no Israeli woman who was assaulted came forward. So I'll stop there and we can continue later in the Q&A. Thank you.
Dr. Nasruddin?
Yes, and building on this, I mean, from my research and work, it's also the whole Orientalist gaze that started out, that created the space and created the work and for what we are seeing today, right? So if we look at the images that were taken of Palestine in the late 1900s, right? 1800s and onward, where these images are of an empty land, where nomads live in the land, and there isn't a culture or a society that is urban. So all these images that were created back then were part of this narrative that you are talking about now. However, I think I am interested more in stepping forward and asking the questions of what do we do with these images. And this is what I'm exploring in my work. So, for instance, when we see in the archives the colonial images that were created of the gaze of the women and the gaze and also the gaze of the photographers onto the people who were photographed. So one way that I'm thinking about these images is actually to look outside the frame of these images and think about what was happening when these images were taking place. So the involvement of the people whom we see in the image, their involvement in the production of the image. And I think this way also, we can think about the agency that the people had when their images were created and where the images were taken. And I'm talking here about specifically about urban communities whose, whom we see very minimal images of them in the archives, such as the women that we see in the film that I made. And I think, this way, this framework of thinking, again, takes us one step forward. To thinking about the colonial images, to thinking about the males who have created these images, etc. And I will stop here. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Nasruddin. Dr. Kinikawa?
Yes, thank you. Thank you.
And I'm sorry if I may wonder, I was wondering if you can also maybe relate it to your own research as well, as in general about white supremacy and colonialism.
Sure. Thank you so much. And I feel a little bit less qualified to speak about this because of my specialty and region that I focus on. But I'll post this as a question. But I think by reading that, I was rereading the introduction by Dr. Dr. Harrow to the a book which I read as a graduate student before, and she starts with how she refers to the film Battles of Algiers, and how, and then speaks about like the Algerian women's role in the resistance movement, and I'm just wondering if and then like while we were watching all these the social media images from Palestine, and like reproducing those the fantasies and violence, like there is a connection between the ways in which like that this colonial harem is fantasized, and also the ways in which the colonial resistance is repressed and also reimagined as terrorism and so forth, and also to this day, and just even from our communities, even though like there has been a lot change in terms of the how the narrative, the central narrative, dominant narrative about Palestine and Israel, etc., colonialism, like especially like a students' encampment uprising and so forth, and yet I see that even within my communities, like there's a like still like very much insistence, like insistence to hold on to this like a colonial harem fantasy, and also the and then criminalizing the colonial resistance in the case of Palestine, and that seems to like many of my colleagues seem to use that as an excuse to actually to maintain silence, or like not calling out genocide, like while like we've seen the horror and the barbarism and like the genocide over months, day after day, and so and I'm thinking about not only, I mean, like I'm asked to speak about white supremacy, but I have to say that this is not just coming from white supremacists and Zionists, although they are the most responsible. But I do see that some people of color who are actually like who have been assimilative and who have been colluding with Zionists in exchange with becoming normalized, becoming part of the dominance, becoming white, and hold on to this fantasy, and to excuse themselves. And so I see that I think our communities, like especially I'm talking about, for example, Japanese Americans, or like East Asian American or East Asian communities, that I guess I don't necessarily belong, but I work with, and so and it is the community split. Like there are people who are like breaking from these fantasies, but also there are especially the leaders, elites, who insist on holding onto that the fantasy in order to claim their career, claim their whiteness, like honorary white status, and so I'm just thinking about, and then I think in the back of my mind I'm thinking about Japanese imperialism, so I'm wondering if it is important actually to think about this beyond white supremacy at this particular moment, so that we could like radicalize our movement and changes that we are envisioning. And so I'm sorry that's my thought in progress. So.
No, thank you so much. Thank you, everybody. I think this is really, really exciting. I just wanted to sort of like pick up on some of the things that you've all mentioned. I think that some of them, you mentioned hypersexuality Dr. Dar, and I was, and Dr. Shakhsari added to it. And I think it's also, and I'm thinking from the perspective of Ella Shohat, even the title of the book, Taboo, because this is also kind of like, this is what you can fantasize about, but this is not what our life is about. This is what their life is about. This is where we go to the bad areas that we can fulfill our fantasies and serve, because we control their lives. So it is not something that's immaterial. It's actually something very material, but it becomes sort of what's allowed and what's not allowed. What's morality? What kind of morality is allowed? What kind of morality is not allowed? I think also the whole question of the harem itself, it goes back to, I think we had a discussion maybe before on that, about even in Mary Wollstonecraft, the education of women. She says that women should not be part of the seraglio, and which is harem, and she assumes everybody in the whole region, from Morocco all the way to the maybe Central Asia, are all living in harem, and kind of like doesn't even understand what's a harem, how much money is required for a man to keep a harem, if everybody is living in a harem, and so on, and what happens inside it, and who. There is a whole structure even within the Ottoman empire. Even within that, there is a structure within it, and so on. So completely, just basically mentioning this and that. The minute you mention that, it sticks to people's ideas. And I think in everything that you're saying, is this, what does it, and it's, you've all discussed the whole question of Orientalism, and I was actually going to maybe even kind of maybe now is the time to actually think about Islamophobia too, because why is it that it is very easy for the publics in Western countries to believe? This speaks to the imaginary, to believe, and that okay, of course, of course Hamas men are rapists anyway, whether they rape this time or not, but they're rapists, okay? The men are rapists. This is what it is. And then Richie Torres says in the New York Times interviews, how could they actually think that Palestinians, how could they support Palestinian queer rights when Palestinian queers don't have rights in their own societies? So that is basically, it's a way to justify genocide. And so there is ideas about, and then one of the main leaders of the gay movement in New York area, and one of the main like wealthy leaders, says that it's actually have been like saying that the whole Quran should be burned and should be destroyed. It's a terrible, book. And so there is a lot of issues that are coming into all of this. And then the other idea about Orientalism, that until not long ago, Asians, East Asians in particular, were called quote unquote Orientals. So then, but then it's not actually applies to the way Edward Said speaks about Orientalism. So I was wondering if you can like maybe develop a little bit this, and maybe move into the next topic about colonial feminisms and pinkwashing. And I don't know who wants to kind of like go first.
Can I just comment on something you said, Rabab, right now, which is, I think it's absolutely related. You cannot talk about colonial harem or colonial feminism without talking about Islamophobia. Of course, it is very much intertwined. And what you mentioned about the flyer actually fits very, fits perfectly here, because the idea of, again, the mask, or kafia worn like a mask, creates that anxiety of not seeing or being seen, and also the all the Islamophobic stereotypes that come with niqab and terrorism, the kind of marking of Muslim women's bodies because of wearing hijab or the niqab, as terrorists, as hiding, as treacherous. And that is, those are Orientalists, of course, and Islamophobic representations of Muslim women. I have an article on virology, which I wrote before the genocide, during the COVID, and the argument that I'm making with the anti-maskers is also related to the anxieties that are created by the mask for the Islamophobic, even feminists who are conflating the mask. Which bodies who are wearing the mask become suspicious, right? Which bodies inherently carry the risk of terrorism, and therefore wearing a mask makes them the terrorists, right? Marks them as a terrorist. So those are things that we need to think about. And also the racial aspect of the mask is connecting. It is not just the Muslim bodies, but if you guys remember during COVID, the anti-maskers, feminists who had, so-called feminists, not really feminists, were anti-maskers who had the slogan of "my body, my choice," talking about the mask, and next to it another sign that had a very racist imagery of a Black woman with a muzzle and saying that masks are for animals and slaves. So, there is also the racial aspect of masking, whether it is in a protest now or because of COVID, that is very much racializes Black bodies as well as Muslim bodies in a way that dehumanizes them and marks them as terrorists. And this is definitely something that goes back to the Orientalist representations of Muslim women, and and also we see the way that Muslim men who are in protests and wearing keffiyehs in that way are also definitely by just default are assumed to be terrorists, pro-Hamas, and so on and so forth. And we see those accusations as well. So I'll stop there. But I can go to the next round after other people comment.
Yeah. I think I was going to actually call on other people to speak about this, because it's also the representation when people, women, men, trans, when people decide to put the masks, whichever mask, it's a niqab, it's a hijab, it's a keffiyeh, and when they are represented as putting it to represent evil, how is it? And I think this is pretty much in your area, Mahasan, right? And also I think Huma with the cinemas, but it's kind of how is it perceived, and where is the question of my body, my choice is a very individualistic thing. So where is the question of the collectivity versus this whole liberal notion of individuality and so on? So I think, Huma, you were nodding. Do you want to go for next? Okay, go ahead. Yeah.
Yes, I just wanted to actually jump on and mention Anne McClintock's idea of ponotropics, how this colonial obsession about categorization, surveying, the land as this object to be consumed, to be taken over, also is displaced onto the bodies of the colonized, the people of all genders, women, men, and the desire to see through them, to see them naked, to see them, absolutely the face unveiled, but the desire for the land and the desire for the body of the colonized are very much linked together. And we see it in colonialisms throughout the world, throughout time, how this pornotropic desire, the pornography of the land, pornography of the colonized body are linked together. And so this Israeli fetish, Israeli obsession with the bodies of Palestinian women, those TikTok videos with the lingerie of Palestinian women, while they are participating in a genocide, they have zero distance. They can't look at there's zero self-reflection at what they're doing, because they are showcasing, they're highlighting the perversion of genocide. And my mind keeps on going back to the Pontecorvo's 1966 film, The Battle of Algiers. I wonder if your students have seen it so far.
Actually, they're supposed to see it before the next class, because it's the Richard of the Earth talk back.
Okay.
So we're going to be talking about Vietnam.
So I can't reveal stuff about it. How even the lack of that veil can be a mask of its own self, which women from colonized lands, and Algeria in particular in this case, used to be a part of the anti-colonial resistance. So, masks can be of different kind, and Fatima Mernissi wrote about it, her critique that Western women, when she went to buy some clothes in America, how she couldn't, there was nothing to fit her size. So the corset, this body type that the US and Euro America have internalized as the female body type doesn't really fit. And that in itself is like a corset. It's a mask that women hair wear, or the makeup, cosmetics, it's the hair has to be a certain kind, all of that. So I will stop with that. Thank you.
I actually want to say something about that, but I want to see if Mahasan or Tumomi want to say something. Go ahead. Yeah.
I just want to, add one thing about also, how the colonial mind weaponizes the weaponization of white women's bodies, right? To actually to justify, right? So the allegation against the Hamas fighters at the beginning, and then and then you've got the images that Uma you're talking about, and Sima you're talking about, and the question is, why, how come they don't see the atrocities of their actions, right? How come they don't see that, the allegations against Hamas, are just as awful, as horrible as as the actions that they are taking. And I think I mean the whole idea of this weaponization of also the body of the white woman, right, is at play here. Thank you.
Tumomi?
Yes. I'm not sure if this fits in this conversation, but I was thinking about like Dr. Abdul Hadi's question about Orientalism and so in many ways, I think like East Asian studies have embraced the advanced Orientalism, like in many classes that is taught, but at the same time, when the Orientalism is taught, it is actually appropriated into something about East Asians or like Asians, and then it is the Palestine or like Islamophobia or anti-Arab racism are actually covered up or like even like forgotten in many cases where Orientalism is taught in East Asian courses, classes, and which has been critiqued. I'm sorry, I can't remember the authors of the articles, but so I'm just thinking about like there are like white supremacist appropriation of East Asian bodies and like sexualized fantasies that exist, but somehow like critiquing that without actually confronting like Islamophobia and anti-Palestine racism, to say the least, like that actually like doesn't make our critique complete, of course, but also I think the ways in which I think that there is need to think about the different ways in which the racialization works against different communities, and like this whole differences which between differently racialized groups. I think that needs to be centralized more like in the East Asian critique of Orientalism, and that actually I'm just thinking about the program like in comparison to like the colonial feminists who actually forget about the differences, and they kind of centralize their own experience of in this case sexualization of a gendered body, and in order to actually cement the central colonialism and the colonialism, imperialism, and attack with the other people, and so and so I think I'm just thinking that the way in which Orientalism is adopted by East Asians, I think it has both sides, right? I mean, like it is, in many ways, there is some experience which speaks to each other. Like there are some we could use that to build solidarity, but at the same time, East Asian is actually using it in a way to cement colonialism and then becomes settlers of color. And so I think, I'm just trying to figure out myself like how to critique it and how to build a stronger solidarity by confronting those Islamophobia and anti-Palestine racism within the community.
Yeah. I'm thinking about like, let's say, about not only East Asians, but I'm thinking about maybe a couple of things come to mind. Some is a part of your work, some of Huma's work. In your work, Dr. Kinakawa, is the ways in which, like the whole discussion about the so-called comfort women and the Imperial Japan sexual violence during war, and as it's compared, and the concentration camps during Second World War are linked by Zionist organization, not the anti-Zionist groups that we're working with, not our communities, including our Asian communities, Japanese communities, Japanese American, but are connected in a way that are like so we use this and we use the Holocaust and we compare them with each other, but in order to say that these are like exceptional occurrings, and that from which Palestine is expelled, is literally expelled, is not allowed to be part of it. So this is one aspect of it. So it goes over it. So there is alliances around Zionism that incorporates Orientalism, that incorporates Islamophobia, that deals with all of these things. So that's one case. The second one is the whole question with the BGP and the Hindutva, which is there's so many alliances, and actually even with Muslim South Asians, that there were a lot of alliances, the Jewish Muslim alliances and so on. You turn on and you see that it's actually a fig leaf that's covered in order not to discuss Palestine, not to talk about what's going on with Palestine and so on. And it's generally organized by Zionist organizations who are apologists for Israel in order to cover up one, and secondly, because there are similarities in ideology. So it's not actually now similarities, and that's kind of like they adopt the same attitude towards Kashmir that they adopt towards Palestinians. So there is Kashmiri terrorists, there is Palestinian terrorists. There is this kind of like it. There is, I mean, and I'm not saying they are all the same. I don't think we have done enough comparative analysis and enough analysis of each case and of each context in order for us to be able to counter all of this stuff, because we are presented with all of it. But in order for us to kind of counter it, we have to deconstruct it at so many levels. I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah. Can I jump in, Dr. Abdul Hadi? So thinking about with you and Tamami about the various other areas where Orientalist, the theory of Orientalism is used, misused, played around with. In India, there we know that the Kashmiri Muslims are under genocide alert, and Indian Muslims are also under genocide alert. And preceding the Hindutva party, preceding BJP's rule that started in 2014, in 2012, I think, or 2011, there was an incident when in Delhi, in New Delhi, the capital of India, they arrested 8 or 10 people as alleged terrorists in an incident, and all the people, 8 or 10 people, were photographed and in the major newspapers wearing keffiyas covering their head, and brand new keffiyas. And these are not obviously Palestini keffiyas, but these are that generic keffiya that many Muslims in different parts of the world use it when they're going to the mosque, or the Maulvi, the Imam, might wear it around his head or his neck. And so they all had brand new keffiyehs of the same color, the same type. And I looked into it. Apparently, the Indian police had bought keffiyehs, and they were the ones who put them on to the arrested people. So and it was their excuse was that they were masking to save the privacy of the arrested people. They were using keffiyehs to cover their faces. So I'd always written about the criminalization of Muslims, which is borne out statistically, that although they are like 12 to 13% of the population, they are more than 40% of the prison population. They are more than 90% in the death row are Muslims and Dalits. And here it was the Islamization of the criminals, or the alleged criminals, that they needed to put this keffiyeh on people that they are alleging are criminals. And there was no, again, there's no Indian academic, no scholar of post-colonial studies ever wrote about it, ever caught it out, ever talks about this. It is so pervasive. And it goes with this anxiety of veiling and unveiling, which is replete in Brahminism, like Zionism, this theory of superiority, which enables the genocides of Dalits and genocides of Indian Muslims and genocides in Kashmir, where the Dalit men and women, people of all gender, were refused the right to cover their top bodies. So women had to go bare-breasted. Men could not wear a shirt, and it was under the penalty of death, that they couldn't cover their bodies, had to be made available to the sight of people of the higher caste. And then the anxiety to mask the Muslim men with keffiyehs, right? So these are very interesting things to think about. Thank you.
And the ways in which actually U.S. troops in Afghanistan and Iraq, and they're always wearing keffiyehs, like they come out in videos. And I think all of these issues, we really need to think about them, about the research agenda, and what are some of the issues we really need to talk about and think about. Okay, I'm tempted to kind of like respond to so many things, including the whole question of quote unquote unveiling Algeria, and what does this really mean? But I would like us to go, maybe we discuss it in the next, but to really talk about the colonial, how does colonial feminism and pinkwashing in particular enable and legitimize and facilitate the genocide in Gaza in particular. So whoever wants to jump, please do. And then the next question would be, what do we do about it? And then we can actually open it to discussions among us also, and also to the comments from the chat. Okay, so who would like to jump in first? So, I mean, we can actually take the most recent example, and maybe not the obvious things that we already all talked about the ways, the accusations of Palestinians, Hamas in particular, of the mass rape, but also the ways in which feminists also responded by saying, "How dare you accuse us of not listening to survivors?" So by distancing themselves from Palestinian liberation movement and standing against that, how do we think about that, and how does this enable, and also how does pinkwashing enable that? We saw the Israeli soldier putting up the rainbow flag on the tank, when historically it was always supposed to be against militarization, against militarism, and but then since they said, okay, don't say don't tell, and then that they revoked that policy in the military, it's sort of like enabled that. It's kind of like, how do we think about that? How does it enable the genocide? In what ways? Folks, do you want to comment on that?
I can talk about pinkwashing a little bit.
Oh, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. So just, I don't know how much students have read about pinkwashing, just so that everyone is on the same page. Maybe just saying a few words about what pinkwashing is, which is basically the weaponization of queer and trans rights to produce the binaries of civilized, barbaric, which are basically colonial binaries, to legitimize, as Rababi were saying, genocide, colonial and settler colonial violence in general, and imperialism, military intervention by colonial entities, examples of which abound. Iran, the case of how Iran is portrayed as homophobic, all the media and film representations of Iran and stoning to death of queers and so on and so forth that we see, which is juxtaposed then to freedom in the US, or the juxtaposition of Palestine. A lot of the hate mail that I got in December and January was using my identity as a queer or non-binary trans person and saying that, well, why don't you go to Palestine so that Hamas stones you to death, or so on and so forth. So these assumptions, or this kind of knowledge production where Palestine is portrayed and Palestinians are portrayed as homophobic and transphobic vis-a-vis Israel, that is portrayed as queer-friendly, trans-friendly, which of course is not the reality of it, right? A lot of queer and trans people in Israel are not given the, if you want to think about rights as the right to be in the military, yes, Israel allows gays, and as you mentioned, Rabab, the disturbing image of the rainbow flag, saying the first rainbow flag that was erected in Gaza with the words "in the name of love," basically legitimizing genocide in the name of queer love. So, but of course, Israel remains extremely heteronormative and homophobic. But this is what states, as I said, such as State of Israel, have been doing, Israel in particular, through the Brand Israel campaign for over 2 decades, by claiming that it's the only democracy in the Middle East where gays can serve in the military. The U.S. Talking about gay marriage, which is really the agenda of conservative gay and lesbian groups that are focusing on the kind of rather than focusing on universal healthcare, affordable housing, or affordable education, they're fixated on the right to marry, which, as many people have argued, is really just about privatization of healthcare, right? Why should it be that someone accesses healthcare or insurance through getting married to somebody else rather than having universal healthcare? And it's really about normalizing queers according to the nuclear norms of family. And as many people, Jasbir Boer and others have argued, pinkwashing is closely related to the concept of homonationalism, which is the way that nationalism folds queer and trans people into its projects of normalization and assimilation, through which then certain iconic sexual identities, whether it's gay, lesbian, LGBTQIA, or queer and trans, are produced according to the US or Israeli racial norms. And of course, these sexual identities which serve the interests of global capitalism and the market, and also the US or Canadian, European and Israeli colonial and settler colonial interests are these identities are produced as normalized and are used as yardsticks of progress and democracy. So, if you have gay rights, therefore you are, you have reached progress. And many people, Rowe and others, have written about the ramifications of this in Africa, and actually the way that this concept, the way that aid to African countries that are suffering from the legacies of colonialism is attached to whether they have queer-friendly rights or not, which of course puts many queer and trans people who are then blamed for the US cutting of aid in danger. So basically, going back to homonationalism, what it means is that, like I said, hegemonic notions of queer and transness are assumed to be the legitimate way of being queer and trans, and the rest of the world is supposed to follow these ideals and standards, or they're considered to be backward and not queer, not trans, or homophobic and transphobic. And of course, in need of rescue through war, through genocide, through colonization. And, Israel is notorious for also blackmailing Palestinian queers in its apartheid and occupation projects for years now. And so measures of progress become having gays in the military or gay marriage, coming out, draping oneself in a US flag or Israeli flag. These are like obvious ways of homonationalism implicates queer and trans people. But I would say even queer and trans people who may be against pinkwashing are often implicated in homonationalism, in that they have normalized the Euro-American queer and trans identities as universal. An example of it is, coming out as a sign of queer liberation. I was actually in a pinkwashing workshop just this last week, and one of the speakers who was against Israeli pinkwashing said something to the effect that when pinkwashers say that queers have no rights in Palestine, our response should be that, well, end the genocide and occupation so that Palestine can develop and queers can have rights and be liberated. And I understand the well intentions, but the logic again relies on the colonial binaries of backward Palestinian culture that is in need of progress and liberation through queer imperialism. So if we end Israeli occupation, then it's time for queers to develop Palestine. So I think unfortunately, colonial feminists and queer agendas are repeated in these progressive or even some radical queer organizing, but also in particular in mainstream. I think Tomomi has talked about this in women, gender, sexuality studies or other departments that are basically centering particular kind of texts and exclude those that theorize gender and sexuality from Southwest Asia and North Africa. And this kind of absence of, or I should say near absence of such texts reflects this kind of epistemological groundings that canonize European scholarship as the queer theory. So as if the rest of us are chopped liver, we can't theorize. The only theory comes from, the US or Europe, and, if you basically try to use, and I've written an article, Fatima Mernissi came up, I think Homo mentioned Fatima Mernissi. I have, talked about Mernissi's Dreams of Trespass as a text that we should be teaching in queer theory. But of course, the assumptions are that, well, Fatima Mernissi was straight and she was homophobic and so on and so forth. So we can't even imagine ways of rethinking queer that do not fit the definitions of what constitutes queer, what constitutes trans, and what constitutes queer theory.
Can I go next?
Yes, and let's now just make shorter comments.
Sure.
So we can get to the final question and open it up to the audience.
Sure. I just wanted to add on that I think of
go ahead.
I think of pinkwashing as a colonial form of queerphilia, which is actually profoundly otherwise. It's actually profoundly queerphobic because it strips queer people from oppressed nations, from colonized people, of their politics of liberation, politics of family, politics of ways to be. It flattens, it erases all the indigenous ways that queer people in their lived realities, where it is not the Western American model of coming out and being queer in this homonormative way, but there are so many different ways of being non-binary gender. There's so many different ways of queer lives, and from South Asia, from Kashmir, the hijras do not fit into this way. This necessarily Western way of thinking about genders or thinking about sexualities, and it's the same in Kashmir. So this pinkwashing is devastating to actual queer people. And it is so racist and so colonial of the Euro-Western Academy to hold us to the standard of coming out and being openly gay and openly trans or whatever it is that they want us to fit into. It's their colonial category. And they expect us to fit into those categories and to use it to actually colonize us, to use this to civilize us, because that is the Palestine and what's happening in Palestine, what's happening in Kashmir, the colonizers' assumption. And it's exactly what happened, as Seema Jan, you mentioned, in Afghanistan, the desire to liberate the women, the desire, and it's the same colonial narrative that has played on for centuries that we still do not seem to have gotten a grasp of, to recognize it when it first raises its head, and it's ongoing. So I'll end at that. Thank you.
Who would like Tomomi or Mahasan would like to go next?
I just want to remind everybody of one thing. I don't know, the No Pride in Genocide call that Al-Qaws put out. It's online, and I can put it in the chat here in the thread for people to read if they haven't done that yet. Thank you.
Tomomi?
Yeah, so I think to add to just a very quickly, like I think that pinkwashing also erases the actual colonial imperial history in which, you know, like conquistadors identify themselves as like used cis heteronormativity to others and criminalized like indigenous communities here and also Arabs like, you know, there's lots of documentation in the literature that's like, you know, they first attacked like, you know, like the royalties who were cross-dressing in Cuba and then like you know, like threw them to so that dogs can eat them, etc. I mean, like there are many famous quotes. I'm sorry, I can't remember exactly where that particular one is coming from. But so I mean, there's a switch, right? Like in terms of the modernity and also indigeneity, like, you know, like the cis heteropatriarchy initially was used as a sign of modernity and to differentiate itself from savages and primitives. But then now they are switching that around in order to actually erase the very violent history itself, and like and then like uses like because of the violence, like there is a, you know, like the being queer was racialized in certain ways, like within different communities, and made it difficult for queers and trans people to live in their own communities. And then now, like, you know, like Israel and other like imperialist states come back and say like now they are gonna use like a modern notion of queer and trans in order to actually criminalize and punish actually the indigenous, trans, and queer people again. And so I'm not sure if I said it in a clear way, but I think that, you know, changes in like superficial changes in the signs and like that actually continue the same violence, but at the same time makes it I don't know, like it's camouflage. I mean, like it makes it difficult for queer and trans solidarity. It's a divide and conquer tactics again, I think. And so
Okay, before we move on, I just want to make sure that people are asking in the chat they would like resources, and also the students in the Palestine course. I promise to give them readings by the people who are participating. So please, you can email them. You can list them now, or you can just share them with us, and we'll post them We'll post them on the class and on the open classroom. So we would like whatever you mentioned. I also wanted to just make a couple of comments about the whole question of maybe about also our approaches. I think historicizing all our studies always helps. So, for example, historically, the US, in particular, the US government and Western European governments have supported Islamist conservative groups against the leftist groups everywhere in the world. And then when the Iranian Revolution took place in 1979, that was during the Cold War. But soon after, when the Soviet Union, the socialist bloc fell apart, now all of a sudden and Islamist groups became militant against the US. Now they became the ones that there is the whole question of like democracy and rights and women's rights and all of this stuff becomes a big issue, which hasn't been really won in the Western world to start with. So it's always, the gaze is always on the colonized world to see how much have you accomplished. There is the yardstick. How much have you accomplished of the yardstick? But there is no self-reflexivity to look within and say, kind of like the way Seema was talking about the gay marriage and the whole discussion around it, the materialist, the capitalist, the individualistic, the liberal notions of it, and so on. So I think if we think about that and think about how the discourse changes from one context to the other, at what point communism was the most evil, McCarthyism, and what point the left becomes like the worst evil and the terroristic, and so on. And now the Islamists are the most. And then once in a while they'll mention left and so on. They're still on the quote unquote terrorist list. But there is, I think, it's like they're fine-tuned things that we can keep thinking about. That's one thing. Also the other thing is that the role of colonialism in constructing particular ways of thinking about sexuality in our context, in our regions of the world. I mean, this is kind of like the way it exists today is not the way it existed throughout, for example, the Islamic rule. It's not. It's the colonialism came in, and the first rules around against same-sex in England, in India and Egypt were legislated by the British colonial rule. They weren't by the Egyptians or by the Indians. They came with because they were imposing Victorian morality at the time. So I think these are things that not only the general public doesn't know, and not only our students do not know, which is our role to kind of like teach them about that, make the resources available, but even our colleagues do not know. And this is what like Dr. Kinakawa is speaking about, is that the people need to be actually much more active and less lazy in the academy to learn about of these issues, to not throw around, like a lot of the time people equate anti-Islamophobia with anti-Arab racism. It's not the same, because Arabs come in all religiosities, and some people are called Arabs, and they're not really Arabs. They're in Arab countries, but they have all sorts of ethnicities and nationalities, from the Kurds to Amazigh. I mean, a whole bunch of things. So I think this is not the same. So they use it interchangeably, or anti-Palestinian is Islamophobia. Sometimes it is, sometimes it's not. And so I think there needs to be much more care, paid attention to that, to think about how do we discuss certain things. And then the U.S. Supreme Court overturned Roe v. Wade, and then they have actually the goal to come and lecture the rest of the world about women's rights and queer rights and so on. It's kind of like work on, and I'm not saying, and I don't agree with, I agree with you, Seema, about the critique of your colleague, is that, leave them alone, you need to be culturally sensitive because that's their societies. But that's not actually true, because there is a very active movement and a very loud movement of queers throughout the region, throughout Swana, throughout the world, and so on. But they're not being paid attention to, because they're anti-colonial, because they're anti-capitalist, because they're anti-imperialist, because they're anti-Zionist, and they are inconvenient for the thinkers and the liberals whose thoughts do not fit with this. So it's kind of like, let's dismiss them, not think about them, not look them up. And sometimes they say we don't have research, and all of this stuff is available in English. So I think this is also part of the ways in which knowledge and the selectivity of things and the ways in which the academy is constructed the political economy of the academy is constructed as that. So, okay, I'm going to stop and then move on to like what the final discussion. So what should we, okay, so what do we do about it? What should we do about it? What are some of the things we need to do in order to confront colonial feminism and pinkwashing? You know, obviously I talked about the production of knowledge, but what more things come on, like, you know, what can we do in order for us to defeat those tendencies that enable genocide and express our solidarities? What have some of the things that we've seen been? So who'd like to go first? Simila, do you want to go about the thing? Okay, go ahead. Yeah.
Sure, I can start, and I'm actually going to respond to this with what Al-Ghaus has written. As Mahasan mentioned, there's a piece on Al-Ghaus' website that is called "Reflecting on Queerness during Genocide," and I'm not going to read the whole thing, but I think that, you know, these paragraphs coming from queer Palestinians in the West Bank is in particular important because they're telling us what to do. And I'll just read a few paragraphs. And they say, in times of anguish, as well as in times of growth and political unity, building communities and relationships in the most sustainable, urgent, and crucial thing is the crucial thing to do, especially in response to mass destruction, carnage, and displacement. As all internationally sanctified frameworks familiar to us are proving to be useless, from human rights to nation-state models, international law, and liberal identity politics of representation, it is time to continue our labor in building queer communities across Palestine and beyond to support each other. It is time to disengage from any Western framework, including LGBT and queer political and organizing frameworks that are complicit with the genocide in Gaza, and resist colonial Western domination forced on our movements through complicit funders and global allies whose interests end in our queer identities. Resist hollow human rights frameworks, commercial and depoliticized pride and visibility, and homophobia and identity politics organizing, and connect to our local wisdom and power. I think that's really important. You know, that's what we have been talking about, the kind of indigenous forms of knowledge. They continue, we must continue to divest from identity politics and the pressure to frame our work only as LGBT and queer and not as an active part of building our liberation. While homophobia and transphobia don't disappear in times of war and may even increase, we have the responsibility to find ways to engage with society and understand the relationship between sexual and gender violence and the violence of colonialism against us. While our queerness was diminished during these painful months, our mere Palestinianness is undergoing the most brutal forms of literal erasure. Many Palestinian queers speak in our community spaces about the latter and not the first. So I'm going to stop there with, I think, what I think is really a wisdom that we need to consider in thinking about queer organizing.
Okay, Mahasan, you seem to want to jump in.
You know, Dr. Abdelhadi, I think really it's the encampments, you know, that the experience of these encampments, what we can learn about the encampments from, you know, the students who have come together of different backgrounds, you know, non-Zionist Jewish students, pro-Palestine students, Palestinian students, you know, of queer, non-queer backgrounds. But I think, you know, these encampments are really sites for us to learn more about solidarity, learn more about, you know, how we can come together and forge solidarities for the struggles. Thank you.
Thank you, Mahasan. Huma or Tomomi? Well, go ahead, Dr. Kinakawa.
I just wanted to say, share like useful sources quickly, useful, I mean, like, very helpful. So like in terms of like San Francisco Pride, but beyond, like I don't know how to share the link, but I shared it in the chat. But Yafa, who has been very vocal in San Francisco Bay Area, and Dr. Jihadi knows them well. But they have been, their Instagram posts have been very much helpful for me to, and they do repost other activists like the perspectives too. And so like, if you were in Bay Area, especially, that's the place, Yafa's Utopia. I think that's the Instagram name. And then also Queers Undermining Israeli Terrorism, Quit. They have been there for a long time, and their posts have been useful ways to enter the conversations in the Bay Area and beyond. So I just wanted to share those, and I think reading their course have been helping me to join the.
In the East, there is Kaya, Queers Against Israeli Apartheid, too. I mean, there's a lot of
Homa and Geshem and like many others.
Yeah, go ahead, continue.
Yeah, I just wanted to reiterate what Seema Jan had mentioned, that Al-Qaeda for me has been, they've been pioneering, groundbreaking in their work, deconstructing pinkwashing and positing an indigenous, queer-centered, decolonizing point of view. And there's so many groups here. Quit is one of them. I've marched with them when my kids were actually really small. And in Kashmir, for example, there are groups called Sonzal, which initially in 2019, when India formally annexed Kashmir, they put forth certain articles on the blog, which they had to quickly take down. So they're no longer on the blog. The censorship in Indian-occupied Kashmir is so strong. But there are queer voices speaking for decolonialism, anti-imperial sources that are there, and they are there, that work in the work of search through Al-Qaeda, through Quit, through all of these groups is a part of decolonial work. And I recommend everyone do this work and be aware that the censorships is ongoing, and to be aware of who occupies the web, who is allowed to be on the web, knowing how Twitter and Facebook and WhatsApp, etc., have collaborated with colonial regimes, whether it's in Israel, whether it's in India, and so on. We need to be wary of that. Thank you.
Thank you. I wanted to also, while you're thinking about maybe comments among us, because there are no questions, there is comments in the chat. So we can, we have like 15 minutes for closing statements, for discussion among us, if we have any discussion and so on. I do have a question to ask you all. I wanted to remind everybody of our next open classrooms that are on July 5th, Friday, from 11 a.m. to 1 p.m. Pacific, West Coast, 2 to 4 New York, and 9 to 11 p.m. Palestine. The title is The Wretched of the Earth, Talk Back, Vietnam, Algeria, The Spirit of 68, and Decolonizing the Curriculum. And then the final one will be on July 8th, again at the same time. It will commemorate Ghassan Kanafani and the culture of resistance. And we will be having people who are working on the writings of Ghassan Kanafani, and also we are very actually honored to have a Palestinian art worker who has been singing and archiving Palestinian songs from the 30s and the 40s, not only from the current period, and also musicians who have composed music and about it, to discuss the role of music, the role of art, the role of paintings. For example, this iteration to my where is it? Okay, no, yeah, here, Palestine. That's actually Ghassan Kanafani's drawing, but it's made of embroidery. Somebody took it, and so there is like, this is going to be a discussion about what does it mean, what is the art of culture and culture of resistance. So keep that in mind for the students in the Palestine class. When you're watching, you know that you will be receiving the email for our discussion in the closed session with the readings Please read them, please attend. If you haven't read them, that's okay. We'll summarize them as well. And also, I just wanted to say one place we spoke a lot about anti-pinkwashing, but we haven't discussed one of the areas that are really, really important is the National Women's Studies Association that has made a whole, what do you say, 180 degrees turn? Is that the way we say it? Okay. So in which Dr. Kinakawa, Dr. Dar, and I, and many others and Laith are part of in Feminists for Justice in and for Palestine. And so the conference is going to be next November, right? It's at the end of November. Is it November or October? No, mid-November. And in Detroit, there is a lot of attention to not only Palestine, to all colonized, marginalized communities. Issues that have not been addressed before are being addressed. You can check the website of NWSA, and you can see on it the statement of the president, the first blog that was about Palestine and the Black radical tradition. And also there is an announcement in Monday's newsletter about the institute, which is Pedagogical Institute for Teaching Gender and Sexual Justice in Arab, Muslim, and Palestinian communities. Applications are available. Everybody is invited to participate, to apply, to go, and there will be certificates issued for people who need that for their classes and so on. So I think that's also another space where have been a lot of activism on behalf of many feminist groups, the Palestinian Feminist Collective, Feminists for Justice and for Palestine, the network, the Feminist Solidarity Network for Palestine, that has done a lot of work to expose the whole New York Times lie, basically, about rapes in Gaza and so on. So there is a lot of organizing that's going on, and we'll continue working with the Palestinian groups in Gaza, in the West Bank, in the 48 areas. The singer that I mentioned is going to be coming from the 48 areas. We have a discussion of the prison papers. And so it's going to be a very interesting discussion on the 8th. So I would like to ask you if you have like maybe comments to each other, discussions to each other, and one question to answer, because many of our colleagues are asking. I teach literature, I teach English, I teach history, I teach philosophy. How do I include discussion about Palestine and or settler colonialism and or things that students really need to learn at the time when also my university is sending me orders? Do not teach only what is in your field, even though when you know the field is open. So how do we do that? What are some of the suggestions or some of the ideas we're going to have in the institute? That's going to be a very main topic, and we're going to ask people to bring syllabi, discussions, ideas, and so on. But now, because the semester is going to start sometime in the fall, can you share some examples, some ideas, some models, pedagogical ideas of how to do this? Of course, Dr. Kinakawa and I are going to hold several open classrooms, so be prepared for the fall. But can you discuss what can be done and so on? And I should say, again, building also on what Hassan has said, the Popular University for Gaza has done amazing work. So you mentioned the Battle of Algiers, Huma, like the students were screening it on the encampments and having discussions around it, along with the book, The Wretched of the Earth. So this is also very big spaces for learning. But what can we tell also our colleagues? How can we get our colleagues to actually do what needs to be done? And what have been some of the experiences that really need to we need to address? Go ahead, Sima. Oh, and then
No, Tomami, go ahead. Okay, so I know that in my institution, there has been conversation, in particular, for example, with the Senate hearing about anti-Semitism at UMN. They're becoming more and more, strict about what we can talk about, although academic freedom supposedly is on the table. But for example, I think it was last semester when, in response to the statements that initially 2 departments, our department, Gender, Women, Sexuality Studies, and CSCL, Cultural Studies, basically produced in support of Palestine and condemning genocide. There was an uproar, and they have come up with kind of what you can teach. You're free to teach anything you want as long as it's relevant to the topic. So, then a student can come and say, well, how is this, as they did in the Senate hearing yesterday, how it is relevant to what we are studying. And I think, especially if you're teaching English, that's easy. You can teach Palestinian literature. I mean, we were just talking about how indigenous knowledges should be the place from where we theorize. So, rather than teaching about teaching what is written about Palestine from outside of Palestine, in particular using Palestinian literature. And I know questions of translation also come up, but there is, a wealth of literature by Palestinian authors. And I think there are syllabi online. I think, Rabab, you have been doing a great job with teaching Palestine. So teaching Palestine, basically, if you teach literature, if you're teaching about gender sexuality studies, of course, you can think about thinking about sexuality and gender outside of the Euro-American frameworks and starting from elsewhere, not just as an exemplar, but as where theory comes out, right? So not basically reproducing the Euro-American notions of feminist theory, but thinking about how people in Palestine, women in Palestine, men in Palestine have been thinking about gender relationships in historic Palestine, during the Intifadas, and right now during the genocide. So I think those are ways that we can actually center Palestine by including Palestinian authors, not just inside Palestine, considering that we have millions of Palestinians who have been displaced, but also by Palestinian authors in diaspora. So that's one thing that I can think of, and we have been doing that, right? I don't know who, many of us have been doing that, and it's not just genocide after October 7th that we're doing, but for people who haven't even thought about it before, this is the time. There's a genocide happening, and this is the time for you to actually pay attention and bring Palestine into your into the curriculum and into your syllabi.
Tomomi? You're muted.
Sorry. So I just wanted to add to what Sima was saying, that for me, the entry point was to invite Dr. Abdulhadi to my class. And then I ended up doing and she was very generous. And we did we co-organized the open classroom together. And that was amazing experience. And then students reacted all students, that really transformed their lives. And and then I myself, for me too. And then and then that became a kind of an entry for me to be in the collaboration with many of you here, we did the open classrooms of all of you here, and the students were able to learn from you. And I think right now, I don't think there's any way out of being repressed. And but I think the resistance we could have is to be connected with each other. And also Dr. Abdulhadi helps and taught me how to be visible as well, and I got to write back and when we were attacked, and so I think that's the only way. It seems like it's just hard to escape from attacks, the doxing, etc. But I think we can be in community, in solidarity, and I think that's very helpful. And then this whole archive of open classrooms that on the AMED YouTube site, and also Facebook and Instagram, those are amazing resources, for those of us who are starting to incorporate those into our classes. And so just wanted to mention that. And also just one last thing is that for pinkwashing and also colonial feminism are the ones that are actually denying the Palestinian cause Dr. Abdul Hadi's Palestinian course this summer too. And so it is a chance and queer issue to actually fight for that at SSU too. And we need to speak against our colleagues, against our demonstrations. And I think that all of our colleagues here are doing, and I think that's part of our struggle, I think. So.
Thank you, Dr. Kinakawa. I'm going to call on Dr. Dar to respond to one question. We have 6 minutes left, so 2 minutes for the question, 2 minutes for Mahasan, and then we will just say goodbye. So, or yeah, 2.5 minutes. Go ahead.
Sure. So there's a question that was asked: during colonial times anywhere, colonized men were a big part of the workforce, especially inside the houses of colonizers. How can we understand this contradiction? So first of all, I don't think there's a contradiction. Colonization entails the domestication of human beings. It entails the making the colonized people servile and submit to acts of service and pillage by the colonizers, and they're forced to do so. They're forced to do so by the necessities of living, of making a living. But or very often it can be even legalized. For example, in Kashmir, and it's because you've asked about colonization anywhere. In Kashmir, during the 101 rules of the Dogra Hindu Brahminical colonial times, it was only Kashmiri Muslims who were forced into indentured or debt peonage, debt slavery, and they were, except if they were working for a Hindu Brahmin family, or except if they were working for the colonizers. So one way to get out of slavery was to be in the service of a Brahmin household. And I think what is actually more troubling, and but it really is also a sign of colonization, is when, for example, within the British Army in India, and in British India, the bulk of the army, the bulk of the soldiers was actually of indigenous people, of Indian people. And so the Jallianwala Bagh incident, those who actually shot at the people who had gathered there in the Bagh in April 1919 were South Asians, Indians themselves. And this, of course, they're hired guns. Indians and people from North Africa have fought with the French, with the British in World War I, in World War II. We have long lists of martyrs buried all over the world, and this is just a sign of colonization, of imperialism. I don't think that there is really any contradiction in it. Seema, do you have, or anyone else, if they have anything to say?
I'm sorry. Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
I was going to say, like, look, Frantz Fanon himself, who read The Wretched of the Earth, the way he got to become part of the National Liberation Front of Algeria and actually to be part of the negotiating team on behalf of Algeria at the United Nations, was inducted from Martinique to serve in the French army. I mean, all the colonial armies were actually using subjects of the colonial places to include people to participate in all of this. So and people, and the whole question is, then do people stay in the same position of servitude or of colonization, or sometimes people rebel? And so it is not inevitable that if you are in subject of coloniality, you have to stay in it. Actually, that is a motivation to break your chains and move on and liberate yourself. So but it doesn't mean that we have to have more enslavement and more colonization and more repression in order for us to have resistance. That's not that doesn't go the way the vice versa doesn't work. So.
Yeah. Okay. Just quickly to add, in 1947 within Kashmir, the people who rose spontaneously in an uprising against the colonial Dogra regime were the people who had been in service in World War II and therefore had arms and training. So they used that training for an anti-colonial purpose.
Mahasan.
Can I just add something? Oh, Mahasan, go ahead.
No, Seema, go ahead, because I'm gonna just end with some but go ahead.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I wanted to just continue and pick up from what Rabab and Homo are saying, which is that this binary of colonizer and colonized becomes actually complicated with the role of the colonized people within colonial administration, right? So the colonial powers could not really actually effectively colonize without the help of the people from the colonies. And of course, what comes to mind, which is a seminal book that I teach, is Race and the Education of Desire by Anne Stoller, which in the Dutch Indies talks about the way that these binaries are complicated and the ways that gender and sexuality actually work in this colonial context. And also, I don't know if the question that was posed was talking about the gender aspect, that the domestic role is played by men rather than women, and maybe that is thought of contradiction, but it is also, you're right, often in the literature about colonization, we do talk about women and the fetishization of women's bodies, but in many, many cases where there are European women, colonizer women, go and fetishize the bodies of colonized men, in and kind of, in the ways of desiring and fetishizing the colonized man as animalistic, as having, the kind of hypersexual, whatever potency, and so on and so forth. So yes, those definitely the racial kind of aspect of colonization comes to play in those relationships as well.
Hassan?
No, I just want to say back to the original question. I think film is really a great way to integrate into different disciplines and different topics. And I don't know if you know that there is a list of films which I will share with Laith that are open by Palestinian filmmakers for people to screen freely, and I will share this with Laith. And thank you all for this opportunity.
Okay. In closing, thanks everybody. We are 4 seconds over time, 5 seconds over time. But thank you so much for incredible contribution, for amazing discussion. Nader, I would really love for us to continue and have a discussion of your question, but time is up. So please raise it next time early on. And amazing panelists, amazing conversation, amazing contribution. It's going to be memorialized, going to be available on our website. You can watch it. Look out for future events for us and for everybody here, and we continue the struggle, and have a great day. Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you, everyone.